Council member, can you hear me? Councilmember Orlando?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you now. So we'll be
Great.
about 2 more minutes.
All right. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Council. Tonight we're having a work session of looking at the budget that we passed as we put in a mechanism to be able to review this quarterly. So this is the first review of the 2021 budget. All council are present with Councilmember Orlando calling in electronically. So with us all here, I'd like to turn this over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. So as Mayor said, back at our all-day budget briefing, we did discuss having quarterly updates as we move along here through the pandemic. Mayor and Council do receive monthly updates on both revenues and expenditures, but it'll be good to get this out, and so the public will know for sure exactly where we stand. Today is our first review of the budget. We're going to focus on the economic climate, the fiscal year 1920 year end, the first month report of fiscal year 2021. And back in June, I had asked the directors to present to me a scenario that would include even more cuts if they became necessary based on our revenues. We did go through that exercise. I have all the information. But during that work, Andy Bass, our Community Services Director, proposed a policy change that could save ongoing dollars, although small, in his department. He will present that policy question to you at the end of the presentation today, and look for your decision regarding the question. I continue to challenge everyone to really monitor and bring forward these types of possible savings for consideration. Before I hand this over to Dawn, I want to speak to this year's fiscal year's budget. Prior to the city receiving the $29.9 million in CARES, just before the council did your adoption of the budget for this fiscal year, I had presented to you a budget that was 2.8% less overall than last fiscal year, with operational expenses down 6% and a capital plan that was up 2.9%. We discussed changes that I had made internally at the onset of the pandemic to make sure that expenditures were down as we ended the year, and those remain in place. I continue to work with the executive team to make sure that we scrutinize every position, travel, purchases, and capital projects to make sure we do not exceed the council adopted budget. This continues every day as you have charged me to deliver services for this community. Even through this pandemic, Team Chandler, the smallest workforce comparative to other Valley cities with the same services, has completely risen to that occasion. Mayor and Council, I'd like to turn it over to Dawn Lang, our Management Services Director, to continue the presentation.
Thank you, City Manager Reed and Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and provide our first quarterly update on COVID-19 and the financial impacts of that. We have now completed our fiscal year 2019-20 and sent out that final report. But we'll talk to you tonight, really kind of try to give a overview of where we are nationally and at the state level. Then Matt Dunbar, our budget manager, is here this evening as well. He'll step up and he'll talk about our revenues, how that compares to budget, and our expenditure update, and some trend review and some of our major revenues. With that, we will also talk about what we foresee to be the projection as the year progresses. We've kind of done a preliminary projection now, and then we'll lead into the policy question that Marcia talked about a little while ago. So just to jump right into our economic forecast, we've received some of the most updated forecast information nationally. This is just wonderful indicators as we go through all of these different changes that are taking place through the pandemic. This slide indicates the gross domestic product. This is an extremely important measure for us. This is the source of this is the Bureau of Economic Analysis. About 70% of this is driven by consumption. So you can see we've been very solid. This is a quarterly look back to 2017. It's been positive, very stable all the way along until the pandemic hit. There was an immediate reduction in the first quarter and a very steep reduction in quarter two. That is very concerning, but as we continue to pull out, we'll look at the next projection that's from the Federal Reserve. And on this one, this is looking at it from the Federal Reserve's point of view. This is our central bank. This is through June of 2020, and on the top left-hand corner of this chart is the change in that gross domestic product, and this is looking at it on an annual basis instead of quarterly. So that steep dip down in that second quarter of over 30%. Annually, the Federal Reserve's looking at it ending the year at negative 6.5. But they're also projecting in 2021 that we will come out of this at a 5% up and then kind of stabilize, longer run being 1.8. What that means is they're looking at it more like a V-shaped recovery, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Maybe a little more optimistic than some of the other projections we're seeing. We're also seeing the unemployment rate to the right in the blue bars. This again is looking out 2020 and then into the future. You see that very large number in 2020, and it's continuing slowly going down over time. The bottom left-hand corner is the PCE inflation. That's personal consumption expenditures. That tracks anticipated inflation for all domestic consumption. We're showing it's still positive in 2020, but much lower than it has been over the last few years. But then again, ratcheting up, again, signifying that V-shaped recovery. And then finally, the Fed funds rate. This is one of those tools that they're using to stabilize the market. They anticipate keeping it low. Their June projection is for the next 3 years at that level. Long run, bringing it back up again. On the right-hand side, the unemployment chart, if you go back to that one, thank you. The unemployment rate shows the U.S. unemployment rate in double digits. And then for the first time, June 20, we hit double digits since April. But before that, we have been very, very low in Arizona. Arizona's economy is very different. We're partially reliant on tourism and hospitality, but usually we do fare better than the United States overall. So that's another indicator for us. The next chart, this source is Bloomberg, and it's as of August 7th, 2020. On the left-hand side, it shows the monthly retail sales, and it shows it by the month of June back to 2005, 10, 15, and then the most recent 2020. What's interesting about this is actually showing a very steep dip to negative 22, and then it's already rebounded up to positive 27 from the recent bottom that we hit. So again, I think that's a positive indicator, and if we can continue to stay open, it's all really going to be dependent on that. if that continues in a positive track. On the right-hand side, there's a chart called the Market PMI, and it is a survey of supply managers. This one is really predictive. It's much like consumer confidence. And it appears, in this case, we've really, again, it's showing what's happened during the pandemic. We've hit a very low during those last few months. But again, the expansionary environment, it's coming right back up, and we're back into that expansion category again versus contraction. So it all, you've got to kind of weigh all these different sources. They're all slightly different. The next chart is really, really interesting. This is actually one that comes from the Wall Street Journal and the Conference Board, and it's as of August 11th, 2020. It's a survey of CEOs across the globe, and they're estimating whether or not we'll have an L, which is a sharp down and no growth recession, a U, which is straight down and a prolonged bottom and back up, a W, straight down, bounce, down again, bounce, and double dip recession, often referred to, or a V, quick down and back up. Less and less folks are considering it to be a V recession. The majority is in the U range. And that does seem logical, especially as we receive news that there may be, some relief from this, maybe a cure or a vaccine coming at some point. But really, that's going to be what will take us completely out of this. Will be a vaccine or something to that point. But these are all estimates. These are all different projections from different point of views. And really, if you go to the next slide, the most accurate chart I have today is this pie chart. I know what we've eaten and what we haven't eaten. So this is the one I depend on. It gives me a little more confidence. So we've seen the national level. Now we're going to go at the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona, this is information that is published out of the University of Arizona. It is the Economic and Business Research Center. These are estimates through June 2020, and I'll just point out a couple on this chart. Retail sales is one. That's the second indicator down. That one is showing these are calendar years, by the way, 2019, 2020. They're actually showing in that year what was the percent increase on that? It was more than we are showing. And for some reason, I can't recall what that percent was. But when we looked at our retail transaction privilege tax category, that's what we're comparing this to, what we're collecting off retail sales. We had estimated about 9% above, but when, let me step back here for a minute. We estimated, based on the year-end transaction privilege tax retail category, 64 million. So our budget actually was set at 59 million, but it came in at 64. So we are 9% above that. But when we looked at 2021, if you were to go budget to budget, what we were estimating to the new year, we were planning on it continuing to go down another 5%. But because our year-end retail sales came in higher at 64 million, we are definitely in a much better position than what the state is projecting. They're projecting growth into 2021 of much higher, again, let's see, 5.1%. And we, in our forecast, have projected a 3% growth for 2021. So in comparing against the state, I didn't do very well with that. I apologize. I got a little jumbled on my references here. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the state's projection is negative 7.4. We actually budgeted much lower than that. And we're coming out of this, we budgeted only a 3% increase. The state budgeted a 5.1% increase. So overall, we are in a very conservative position. I think and what you'll hear from Matt here pretty soon about our year-end results. Overall, we are really positioned well for what might come ahead in 2021. The other one I want to point out on this chart is the permits, residential permits, and it's near the bottom there. And again, calendar year 2019 and into 2020, they're showing a 2% drop. City of Chandler, from 1819 to 1920, our permits went up 14% in comparison. Again, we are on a trend that is very, very different, and we anticipate, based on conversations with our Development Services Department and permits that are already in process, that as we head into the new year, we will not look like the state's projection here of negative 18.6. We're actually in a very different position. And again, that kind of, in comparing to the recession, the Great Recession back in 9/10, very, very different situation when it comes to building permits and values. This is one area that has continued to remain strong for the city of Chandler and many communities across the United States. And then this is that same chart again for the state of Arizona unemployment. Unfortunately, the state lags, so we're not able to get July 2020, but again, Arizona is faring better in unemployment rates than the US. And if we continue on the path that we're on now with the governor's most recent order, I would anticipate that this would continue to look better in the upcoming months. And with that, I will turn this section over to Matt Dunbar, our budget manager.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a privilege to be here for you tonight to talk about some of the revenue updates that we've seen as we closed out the fiscal year 1920. So on this first slide, there's a few things that we wanted to kind of capitalize on or talk about. Those in the maroon color, those are the actual revenues that have come to the city of Chandler over the last 5 years. So as you can see, we've had a good steady increase over the last 5 years in our revenue stream. And then also in the blue, we have adopted for the current fiscal year. For our 1920 actuals, there's a blue line indicated on there, kind of right at the bottom or towards the top there. And that indicates what our revised forecast was. So we do the initial forecast at the beginning of the year for the following budget year. So in January, we start looking at forecasting for the next fiscal year. So 6 months before we even start. And then we take a look back and kind of do a reset in January. Sorry, we start before then. We do a reset in January. And we reset our impact. Our January revised was 261 million. So if you look on the right there, our initial adopted was 249 million for fiscal year 1920. When we looked at how revenues were coming in after 6 months of actuals, we revised that up to 261 million. And then we had the COVID impacts that we implemented. So we took out 10.5 million from those revenues and showed 251 was our anticipated revenue. The actual revenues came in for the fiscal year at 259.7 million. So if you compare that to our January revised, we were only over by 1.8 million on the initial revised forecast number. But taking into account the COVID reductions we put into effect, we actually came in above our estimated revenues by 8.6 million for the fiscal year. So, you know, the impact initially we thought was going to be more significant, but because of the strong revenues we had throughout the year, we were able to absorb the majority of what we thought that impact would be, and we actually came in quite strong compared to the original adopted budget, and even quite strong compared to our revised with COVID. This chart shows some of the anticipated impacts. As we look, the impacts from the COVID-19 virus are kind of targeted against specific areas of revenue in the city. Number one is local TPT. That is highly impacted, and then our state shared revenues, which are also driven by sales, are also highly impacted. So the majority of the reductions that we put into the budget, the 10.5 million for last fiscal year, that was estimated to be in those specific areas. And so this looks at where we thought the impact might hit us, and then in the red, and then in the blue, it shows what the actual impact was. So as you can see, there was an impact in TPT, much lower in state shared, much lower in vehicle license tax. We actually increased our building division fees, were higher. Parks and Recreation had more of an impact than we anticipated because we didn't really anticipate being closed down at Parks and Rec for as long as we have been. Court fines and franchise fees had a slightly larger impact than anticipated, but overall, the $10.5 million we thought was going to be an impact ended up being in those specific revenue categories about $3.7 million. But when you look at the overall impact of revenues, again, we're down to that $1.8 million impact. So not as dire as we had anticipated or put into the last year's budget at the end of the last quarter, but still an impact. So when we're looking at our expenditures, we look at the adjusted budget over the last 5 years and then our actuals over the last 5 years. Historically, the city of Chandler has always come in under budget, which is, kudos to management and to mayor and council for ensuring that that happens every year. And as you can see, we've come in every year under the adjusted budget. Including this last fiscal year, our adjusted budget was $268.7 million, and we came in at 246.2. That's 91.6% of our adjusted budget spent, and normally we're over 95%. So we had some significant savings at the end of the year, that last quarter, as we put in our spending measures to make sure that we could meet our budget. The current adopted budget is $244 million, so we're right about at what our spending was last year, but we anticipate coming in at or underneath that as well for the current year. In fact, City Manager Reed said in April in our conversation with Mayor and Council that she takes the task of making sure we come under budget very seriously, and to everyone's point, we will meet the budget according to the revenues we receive, and so that's one of the reasons we're having this discussion, is to make sure how revenues are coming up and that our budget can meet it.
So Matt, I got a question for, I think, Councilmember Stewart too, is I do realize that, excuse me, that we had put into effect somewhat of a freezing thing. So of this additional spending, there were obviously some things that were anticipated to be spent when we had set that budget. Are there carryovers with that will carry over? I know normally we don't do that, but will there be some of that money carried over for expenses that did not get spent more than normal this year?
Yeah, Mayor, that's correct. There will be some carryover into the next fiscal year of certain specific items, specifically our capital improvement program items. A lot of those expenditures won't be completed in the current year because they're multi-year contracts and things of that nature, and so there is carry forward on those. But for the most part, that's in line with when you're looking at a trend. We have that each year. So as from a trend basis, you're going to see kind of where we're at and how we're under this year from our historical trend compared to the 91 compared to the 95% spending. So we had additional spending reductions that aren't going to be carried forward. They are just capitalized as back to general fund revenues, back to the general fund.
There's always, I know, carryover in capital improvements, but even because this year is unusual, there's no carryovers just in the general budget.
Mayor, there are always carry forwards in general fund as well as on the capital side. And this year there were some carry forwards as well. Specifically, those that were cost savings in the current year being expended in the next year, we'd have to look at the specifics of those carry forwards to see which ones you could identify as, it was a COVID reduction, and now we're going to carry specifically those cost savings over into the next year.
Okay. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Matt. Hey, great presentation so far. There's nobody here that's going to question how well you guys do at managing the budget. I have a quick question, though. When I look at the general fund and the expenditures, and I see that we come in under budget every year, that does concern me a little bit. And I'm not saying these are big misses, but these are, in my eyes, the budget should match up with just a little bit of spread in between. But when I look over the past few years, I see, and we won't take into last year, I see a $41 million surplus, or something that we could have budgeted a road into that plan. We could have budgeted new parks. We could have budgeted something else. So I see it's very healthy. It's a good place to be. It means we have savings. It means that we didn't have to lay anybody off. But my question is your team, Dawn, and you're working to get a little bit tighter to that budget so we can put things into the budget yearly and we don't have those misses? Because I do see that as a miss. It's a good miss, but I see it as a miss.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, that is a an excellent observation. One thing that might help understand why it's typically right around 95% spent is we always have vacancies. We budget at the full budgeted positions, but there's always going to be vacancies. So we do anticipate automatically a 1.5% vacancy savings. And going into 2021, that vacancy savings ratio has actually increased a little bit because we bank on that savings. So this includes that vacancy savings that is built into our ongoing forecast. And that money then falls back into general fund for those one-time capital purposes. The other thing that I wanted to mention on the operating side, that's the personnel side of operations, but also on the O&M side of operations, there's a lot of times projects or things that are kind of starting to kick off in a year, but because of certain, I don't know, just things that come up during the year, projects that were planned to take place in a year don't necessarily get kicked off or to council during that time frame. So often what happens, to the mayor's question, is those decision packages or planned projects that did not get completed or encumbered because they didn't make it to council during that year, there'll be a request to carry forward those funds. They're committed in the budget, but they just were not able to be spent in that year. So they'll come forward and they'll continue into the following fiscal year. That's another reason you'll see an underspending, and it's more just kind of the nature of our operations and not being able to do everything in a given year, and some things just lag and carry forward into the following year. Does that help? Otherwise, we try to run a very lean organization, and
there's
we're
no doubt.
always looking for those savings.
No, and it's a good explanation. It just, when I see the numbers like this presented the way they are, those things we talk about during the budget process, I understand that we have the 1.5% open rate for employees and things like that, but I just see opportunities with 11 million here and 8 million there to do some things, which I know we were able to use for the Alma School road improvement. So that kind of helped because we pushed that up and we didn't have that money if we were, so that's a good thing, but
Yeah.
thank you.
And through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, I think one other thing to be aware of is when we do have this discrepancy, any balance that is available goes back to fund balance for the next budget cycle to be used for road projects and all those things that come up. So it does get used. It's not in the current fiscal year that we have that savings, but in the following year, then we have that opportunity to then capitalize on that savings and use it for those projects, use it for any one-time opportunities that come through decision packages or through capital improvement plan, those types of things.
So one good example would also be the Veterans Oasis Park, in which we did not have that initially budgeted, but we were able to insert that without a whole lot of pushback going the other direction. So it's the money will get employed. It's just it just is maybe isn't what we talked about at the beginning of the year to go ahead. But so did I hear Councilmember Orlando? Did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good discussion. So I understand the vacancy rate. I understand some carry forward, but what were the other major drivers of this expenditure being outside the normal range?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, are you asking what were the major drivers that brought the actual expenditures under by 91.6%?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So mainly those were the expenditure measures that the city manager put in place early on as the pandemic became a concern. And not only were we looking at reducing the revenues, but we were also putting those expenditure measures in place to minimize future impacts and try to come in under to offset any additional revenue shortfalls. So departments were being very, very careful about, not sending folks to training, especially the conferences and travel. That was pretty much frozen, although they were looking for virtual training opportunities. So there was savings in our training lines. These are things that typically happen on a year-to-year basis, but during this period, that wasn't happening. There were fleet purchases that were held back. Expenditures were scrutinized across the board before they come to the dais, trying to determine, is this the right time to purchase this? Can this hold off? So some of those things did take place, and of course, many of our positions are being held, and that was also generating savings that is included in this reduction as well. So all of those measures together really brought us in 91.6%, and had revenues really been hit like we thought they would, then this would have put us in even a better position because it would have helped offset that additional revenue reduction. And that was really the thought all the way across.
Got it. Okay, so there was additional savings that we were saying, travel, training, fleet purchasing, and other activities.
Councilmember Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor, Matt, and Ron. So we've got some good charts here. That pie I liked especially, the little demonstration of pie, but is the CARES money charted as part of the budget? Is that all part of that? And what does it look like without it?
Yeah, through the mayor, Councilmember Rowe, the CARES money is, we're treating it as grant monies, and those were some of those dollars that were rolled into, carried forward into the next year. We weren't able to spend them when we technically received them in 1920. But those expenditures aren't going to be shown in this year, fiscal year 1920. They'll be shown next year. All those expenditures will be on that line item as grant funded expenditures.
Okay.
Continue. Thank you.
All right, so we have some trend analysis just to kind of briefly go over, and I'll kind of explain what the charts look at here because we have several of them that are very similar. So these charts, they show back from 07, 08, the actual revenues brought into the city. And we tried to overlay some of the major issues that kind of hit, the Great Recession being the most impactful, and the years that was kind of going on, 08, 09, 9, 10. And then also from a virus perspective, we had a major scare in 15, 16, 16, 17 of the Zika virus, although that obviously did not have the same effect on us as the coronavirus did, but we put that in there just to kind of show, was there an effect by other viruses that have hit? Because, we try to see, well, what happened the last time something like this happened. Unfortunately, with coronavirus, we haven't ever seen anything quite like it. But so we have those kind of overlaid over this projection. The red line shows the actual percentage decrease or increase in that year. So it's a little hard to kind of interpret that red line, but if you just think of it as from year to year, what was the percentage growth or decrease? That's what that red line indicates. So the higher it goes, the more of an increase there was. The lower it goes, the more the decrease was from year to year. And then we have our 2020, 21 as our projected in the light blue at the very far left. So from this slide, this is transaction privilege tax. You can see a decline obviously through the Great Recession. And then once things got kind of stabilized, we had more of a traditional growth rate. 4 to 5% is what you traditionally will see on a sales tax side as you add new businesses, as those businesses increase the cost of their goods, as you see some inflationary impacts hitting that, you'll see that kind of grow on a 3 to 5% is what you typically want to see as a normal growth pattern. Anytime you get up to higher growth areas, you're a little cautious that maybe it's overinflating a little bit. But we see that great trend through 12, 13, all the way through 16, 17, continued growth. It gets a little bit better even as we added more and more businesses to the city of Chandler throughout that time. 19, 20, you'll see a little bit of a decrease because that's the first time we have that little quarter of coronavirus impact our actual revenues. And then our anticipated revenues of a 9% decrease in transaction privilege tax for the current fiscal year 2021. So it just kind of gives you a good idea of that trend and what it could look like, why we think we may be coming down to where we're at that 9% decrease. Of course, that's an estimate. That's what, our best estimate at this point is about a 9% decrease due to coronavirus on transaction privilege tax specifically. This next slide is the same thing, but this is for state shared revenues, state shared tax revenues. These also are sales tax based or transaction privilege tax based revenues. And so they are cyclical in nature, dependent on spending, consumer spending. And you'll see kind of a very similar trend to what we saw on the last slide as far as the growth coming out of the Great Recession, about a 3 to 5%, 7% growth indicator throughout there. And then we have those revenues coming in lower in 1920 and flat on 2021, again, due to the coronavirus. Here's our vehicle license tax. This is the tax generated as people pay the registration fees for their vehicles. That will go up. The number of cars that are sold, the greater that will impact, because that dollar value is more. So the older the cars are on the road, the less money we receive, and the newer the cars are, the more money we receive. So you'll see a kind of a direct indicator based on the economy, how strong car sales are doing. This will either increase or decrease based on that specific retail market. So you'll see we indicate basically flat from 1920 to 2021, a slight increase there. And actually, when we look at the sales tax numbers recently from auto dealers were up in the city of Chandler last month. So, you know, they've had some good sales because of the people going out and taking part in that 0% financing for multiple years and the sales that they've been having. So that's had an impact. Of course, that will impact after, because everyone's now purchased their vehicles. We may see a small decline towards the end of the year. So we'll watch that carefully as well. Urban revenue sharing. Urban revenue sharing is one of those that is easier for us to forecast because we know what it's going to be in advance. Those are always the easiest. This is as close to the pie chart that Don talked about as we can get because we know what the revenues for 2021 will be and 21-22. It's a 3-year lag, so by 22-23, that's where we'll see our first impact to urban revenue sharing. And this is based on income taxes received at the state level that are shared with municipalities. So we'll be watching that, and we'll be able to budget for that accordingly as that comes in, but these are kind of known revenues. Again, we kind of see what that trend was throughout the last several years. Our parks and recreation fees. So in this area, you'll see that during the Great Recession, they actually increased. We had more people that were interested in partaking of what the city offered from an amenity standpoint, the classes and things that we do offer. I think there's probably some value to the costs that they would pay at the city level versus a private sector. And when money is tight, they look for an alternative, and you can see some growth, some definite growth in those years in our recreation fees. As you go throughout that, you'll see 14-15 has kind of an anomaly. That's due to an accounting change. We implemented a ActiveNet software system, and when we implemented that, that actually changed how when we were capitalizing on that revenue versus if I were to book something 2 months in the future, today, it would book it today as revenue in this year and not in 2 months when the actual event happened. And so with that change to ActiveNet, some of that additional income or revenue was booked into the next year, 15-16. So you'll see kind of a larger jump in 15-16, and that's because some of that revenue was then placed in the next fiscal year. But fairly strong. And then towards the end here, 2021, we do see a fairly significant impact due to coronavirus and the closures that we have. So when you look at total revenues in general, from last fiscal year, 19-20, we're looking at about a 7% decrease in total revenues. But across the board, that steady growth you see at the 3 to 7%, and then the coronavirus definitely is going to hit us, but we don't anticipate it being like the Great Recession. Although if you look at that first year of the Great Recession, 08, 09, you see that decrease of about 6%. So we're anticipating a similar decrease as that first year of the Great Recession. This chart basically goes through a kind of a timeline from 2018-19 to 19-20, and it shows your TPT tax revenues on a monthly basis. You'll notice that huge peak, that's our Christmas sales that are reported in January. So you can see that trend. 19-20, for the first part of the year, for the most part, we were above or significantly above 18-19 revenues that were coming in. We had kind of a small decrease in December and then a little bit of a decrease in January. So those numbers were slightly off. But then February, March were again higher. And then the lines that go through this, the first line is when the state canceled gatherings of 10 or more, and that was in March on the 16th. March 30th, the stay-at-home order went into effect, and you see that the April numbers, which are actually the March sales, that's when we have our first fairly significant gap in transaction privilege tax. And then we see another more significant gap for May, as that stay-at-home order was in effect for the full month of April, basically. And then the red line indicates when the federal stimulus payments started going out. And then the next line indicates when the actual home order was lifted. And so you'll see that gap between 1819 and 1920 narrows again in June. So that's definitely had an impact by opening things back up. We still have a delta there, but by opening back up, having some additional funding in the community has helped kind of narrow that. With that, I'll turn it back over to Don to talk about some of the other, the last few trend items that we wanted to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Matt. So as we talked a lot about general fund and a lot about the major revenues in general fund, but we wanted to hit on a couple other areas, and that first one is building permit trend analysis. So we worked with Derek's team in Development Services, and we have a great history here all the way back to July. This is a month-to-month history of the number of permits on the top chart and the value of those permits on the bottom right-hand side. The color in maroon is 1819, and the blue color is the most recently ended year, 1920. You can see that, you know, as we know from the last couple years, development has remained strong, but going into 1920, development was very strong, and even during the pandemic months, we were seeing some pretty large spikes there. You can see in March and June, we had spikes in counts. And then down below in the value of permits also reflected in the values. So overall, for 1819, we had 3,594 permits with a value of $805 million. 1920, we had 4,100 permits pulled. That's a 14% increase with a value of $1.1 billion, or 42% increase in the value of those permits. So there's been some pretty significant projects that have been in place overall, but we would anticipate the building permits to continue strong. And the good news with that, of course, is every permit pulled, we collect impact fee or system development fee revenue, which helps support our capital improvement program. The next slide.
Councilmember Orlando.
Thank you, Mayor. Don, on these building permits, do these include Intel's expansion as well as the Price Road corridor, the new buildings that went up there?
So let me just tell you what the spikes represent. In February, we issued a permit for a large interior improvement for Intel. So there's partially there, Intel and the new office building under construction at McClintock and Chandler Boulevard. And those two account alone for about $117 million of the $170 million increase in permit value. And then again, what was that?
Go ahead, the spike June.
And in June, we permitted a large multifamily at Germain in Arizona, 6 office, 1 new Chandler Unified School District high school buildings, new office building at Elma School in 202, and some of the condo buildings at Trevicino on North Arizona Avenue. So there's been quite a bit of activity. Our development services staff's been working very, very hard. But yes, Intel was part of the February values.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Don.
Okay, the next piece of information we'd like to share is around past due utilities. And this is our water, wastewater, reclaimed and solid waste accounts. These charts represent our residential customers in the city of Chandler. The top left-hand chart is the number of accounts impacted, and the bottom right-hand side are the balances on those accounts. This again shows back to July through June, every month for the fiscal year, comparing 1819 in red to 1920 in blue. The one thing, so it mentions on the slide the delinquent utility account that meet turn-off criteria. That turn-off criteria Accounts were previously being disconnected with a balance exceeding $400 and 2 months or more delinquent. So with that, of course, during the COVID months, we have not been shutting off water, certainly understanding the necessity to keep that water flowing. But what has happened are those accounts have increased significantly. It's been one of those things where there's an organization, AMWA, and Arizona Water Users Association, something like that. Anyway, all of the valley cities, the larger valley cities, many of our smaller communities as well are part of that organization. And we are meeting quite frequently and talking about this concern. And one of the things, no one really wants to be the first person to start disconnecting. We certainly want to be very sensitive to what's happening with our residents in our community. So we're looking for ways of trying to help. So some of the things I just wanted to fill you in on what we're doing in Chandler and what I'll be discussing with the city manager and we'll be moving forward with hopefully and informing mayor and council is what the big idea we have is to start with soft notices. So we're going to put together letters to let them know that there's help, that we want them to connect with us. Because these balances will just continue to grow. So we want to try to help them. We have Leah's team over in Neighborhood Resources. They've hired 2 new community resource specialists. They are both helping using the AZ CARES dollars, temporary positions, that they're helping with COVID-related issues. We're working with them in a partnership to help us try to figure out how to get resources to our citizens in the city of Chandler. There's some that may be qualified at lower income levels, but there's a lot of folks that might be above those income levels that are struggling, and we need to figure out how to help them as well. So that is an effort that we're working on. We're putting together a plan to send out these notices and to try to assist our citizens in helping them bring down these balances.
Vice Mayor.
So Don, on these balances, do we charge them interest, and are there other fees, late fees and so that are also assessed in those values?
Through the mayor, Vice Mayor Lopez, when we quit disconnecting, we quit charging interest, and we quit, and the accounts quit incurring penalties as well for late payment. So they are just, it's the consumption that's growing right now, and the charge for the use of the water, wastewater services, and solid waste.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Don. So I see a trend before COVID started of delinquencies. Was there any reason for that?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, we have, I think the kind of the regular reasons that folks struggle. We have kind of the repeat folks that we're working with all the time. We've been unable to really bring those balances down over time. We do run very, very lean in utility services, and really it's a concerted effort. Over the last few years, we've worked closely with our meter services team over in utility services on a very concentrated program to try to bring those balances down, and we've achieved a very large reduction from 17-18 to 18-19, and we were still heading in this downward trend. And then, of course, the COVID crisis hit. So it unfortunately kind of reversed some of the work we've done over the last 2 years to help our citizens bring those balances down. But there is a group that kind of a typical level of our accounts that continue to struggle.
Okay. I didn't see that downtrend that you were talking about. Year over year, it looked like the delinquencies were continuing to rise. But listening to here, I just thought maybe there was something that was you could attribute that to, but do you know when you're gonna when are the lights gonna get switched back on as far as, because I guess we do run lean. I just don't want any services to be interrupted for the whole city because we're lacking revenue in this particular bucket.
Yes, through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, we are actually overall in a very strong position in our water, wastewater utility funds. Overall consumption in the city is up, and many of our larger manufacturing has actually brought in higher billing over the last few months. So and actually over the last year. So it has kind of masked, I guess, the financial impact of what's happening with our residential accounts. And but this is still a very large concern for us, and we want to make sure we get the resources out to our citizens to help with this issue.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. All right, so we are now going to look at 2021, fiscal year 2021. We have 1 month completed, the month of July, and we wanted to look at what we had anticipated. And if you recall, besides the $10.5 million that we reduced in 1920, we anticipated and implemented reductions in the proposed budget of another $20 million. We anticipated that to last us for a 3-month period. But we now have some actual data. We have how we ended the year. We have what happened over March, April, May, June during a shutdown period, and July now, and to actually compare and look back. So we are using that data to look into 2021 and really spread what we're seeing, spread that 20 million over the next 12 months. So first of all, I just want to direct you to this slide. The bar graph in blue, it shows just transaction privilege tax, since that is our largest revenue source and the most vulnerable, I guess, in the city of Chandler during this pandemic. This shows the month of July starting in fiscal year 15-16 all the way up to 2021. The month of July 2021 brought in 12.2 million. And in 1920, the same month prior year, it brought in 12.3 million. So it's almost flat. It's about a 1.1% reduction, or less than the same month prior year. But it was another month that we were closed. So it gives us some actual data. And again, I really believe that this is due to the fact that the city of Chandler is so well diversified in its economic base, the work that economic development does in our council to ensure all of the different types of businesses, that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And this is the result of that. And I think the city of Chandler's fared very well during this. So when we do apply that revenue decline that we're seeing in May, June, and July, similar reductions would allow that 20 million to actually spread over 12.6 months for the entirety of the current fiscal year. But we don't want to just bank on that, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So as we move to the next slide, we still want to continue to keep the current year expenditure measures in place and continue to scrutinize our expenditures across all departments, and our departments are all working together on this. As Marcia mentioned, we did complete that 10% COVID reduction exercise. Every department was part of that. So we still do have information that should things worsen, should our revenues, something unexpected happen, we will be able to respond. We're preparing ourselves just like our EOC does to prepare for the pandemic. Financially, we're trying to make sure we're very prepared for what might come before us, for the unknown. So any questions before I move to the next slide? Okay, so with that, out of that exercise, as Marcia mentioned earlier, there was one policy question that came up out of community services. So with that, they identified a change in library hours, and I'm going to have Andy Bass come up and talk that through with all of you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As we were going through this and we were looking at all of our facility hours, and we focused it on the library, one of the two things we wanted to make sure happened was, one, we wanted to create some consistency among our branches. And most importantly, we wanted to maintain our very high level of service that we provide our residents. We didn't want to compromise that due to a few hours here and there. So we do have 3 potential options that we would like to share with you this evening. One of those options, of course, is to make no change. And And I would like to take this chance to introduce you to our new library manager. And she'll be up here to present and kind of go through our operations and what our proposals are. So with that, I'd like to welcome Rochelle Kuzik to you and to the city.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to join Team Chandler. And certainly while I never encourage cuts to library service, I recognize the need for fiscal restraint and responsibility, particularly right now while we're dealing with COVID. And so the areas where we have identified that perhaps we can reduce hours and therefore expenses within the library operations is in the final hour of operations at all of our branches. So currently the downtown branch is open, well, sorry, not currently. Currently we have COVID hours. Pre-COVID, our hours kept us open till 9 p.m. at the downtown branch. And that tends to be a very light traffic hour for us. And so we feel that it would be a place where we can easily make cuts to reduce that hour of service down to 8 p.m. on those days. And then the two high school branches that pre-COVID were open until 8 p.m. Similarly could be reduced to 7 p.m. And the savings that we're seeing in those primarily are found within our non-benefited and temporary staff hours that are associated with the hours of operation. The Sunset branch would see a reduction in its hours on the Thursday evenings for once we go back to post-COVID hours. The second consideration would be all of those same changes, as well as eliminating Saturday service at our two campus, our high school campus locations. Each of them operate for 4 hours on Saturdays, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And so those are the options for your consideration. And you can see that pre-COVID, our current hours were just over 12,000 hours in the year. Option A, which is primarily evening closures, as well as actually a 1 hour later opening for the downtown branch, we would go down to 10,586 hours. And if we went with option B, which includes the Saturdays, we would be at 10,170 hours. So the savings that you'll see associated with those things are just over $40,000 on option A and just over $51,000 on option B. So I can take any questions that you have. Of course, the thing that I'd like to stress about libraries, especially in times of economic downturn, is that you tend to see an opposite type of direction. While the economy worsens, library use tends to increase. So as residents have to make the difficult decision for discretionary spending, you know, in favor of keeping food on the table, they might turn off their internet services, or where they may have previously bought books or taken their family to movies, now instead they come to the library where they can get those services at no charge. So certainly there is an impact on the community, but I do feel that these are, at least with that first recommended option, they're minimal impact to the community. And I believe that what we will see is a shift in consumer behavior. So much like when, you know, you or I need to go to the grocery store because we need cereal for the kids in the morning, what time does the grocery store close? It closes at 8 o'clock. Okay, I've got a couple of hours, so you go at 7:30. It's the same with library services. If someone's coming in to pick up their holds or they want to use the computer for the last thing at the end of the day, they'll come in that last hour. And so if the last hour changes, so will that consumer behavior, and that's when we will see the increase in access to the buildings during those times of the day.
Mayor.
City manager.
Thank you. Rochelle, can I get you to back up about 3 slides? And as you're talking to the city council, maybe discuss what we've been seeing in terms of utilization of the libraries in those later and early morning hours to help them with their
Absolutely. Looks like we
decision.
need to go forward one more slide there. Do I have that? Yes, I do. So we have, there was a slide that had usage, but let me pull it out of my own files here. So for example, at the downtown library, the busiest hour of the day, or the busiest chunk of hours of the day that we tend to see, is from 11 a.m. all the way through until about 6 p.m., where annually that hour will account for anywhere from 7,000 plus users through the facility down to just over 6,000 users. In the hour between 7 and 8 p.m., we see approximately 4,000 users annually in that hour. In the hour between 8 and 9 p.m., that drops even more to 2,500 at the high and about 2,100 on the low. And that's the difference between Monday and Wednesday, for example. The hour between 9 and 10 a.m. is also significantly lower than that previous high in that 5,000 range. We're seeing 3,399 and 2,905. That's Monday, Wednesday. That is for the downtown library.
Mayor,
Councilmember Orlando.
thank you, Mayor. So, what I'm trying to figure out is what's your average daily use at the downtown library at between 7 and 8?
So through the mayor to Councilmember Orlando, I can't give you, for example, week to week, but this is the overall annual cumulative use in that hour, 8 to 9 p.m. So on Mondays at the downtown branch between 8 and 9 p.m., 2,535 people. Tuesdays, 2,562 people, and Wednesdays, 2,192 people in that hour cumulatively through the year. Versus, let me find the highest peak hour.
Let me, so how many days, look at Monday through Wednesday, right? For the 8 and 9 hours.
Councilmember Orlando, can you repeat that? You're breaking in and out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to correlate this chart with the current hours. So if you look at the chart previously, it's Monday through Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So there is no 9 o'clock hour on Thursday through Saturday, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's 3 times, that's 150 days a year you're open. So if I take that number divided by 2,000, you're saying there's less than, what, 100 people that come in that?
Through the mayor to Councilor Orlando, we are seeing sort of on a low in that last hour on a low day, maybe 18 to 20 people come through, and we have almost as many staff in the building as what we see people. It's just not, it's not efficient operations in that last hour of the day.
Okay, I get that. I appreciate it. I was trying to derive the two numbers. So where's your for Saturday and Sunday?
So through the mayor again to Councilmember Orlando, the Sunday hours, so this is a little bit difficult to see numbers on this particular chart, but as a comparator, between 4 and 5 p.m. on Sundays, that's the final hour of operation on Sundays, the number is 12,649 people versus that final hour on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, where we're just seeing over 2,000 people through the building. So, I mean, the difference is substantial.
I'm sorry, so you don't specific chart for the weekends, do you?
Through the mayor to Councilmember Orlando, I didn't create this particular chart. Compared to, let me look here, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So my charts are different than what I'm seeing here in this slide. The weekend, so here's an example. Downtown library as a reference. On a Sunday, in total, we see 43,509 people come through Sundays, cumulatively through the year. Saturdays, 65,315. And if we were to go down to our lowest day of the week, it would be Thursdays at 48,055. So even Saturdays in the final hour of operation at downtown, 10,274 people versus again, that final hour of operation during the week between 8 and 9 at being just over 2,000. And essentially, it's costing us the same amount of money to operate between 8 and 9 p.m. on those days as it is between 4 and 5 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays.
Mayor, I apologize here. I'm trying to do the math, and all I'm seeing is annual numbers here. So I'm still concerned about closing on the weekend. I don't know what that means. Is it 15 people coming in? Is it 30? Is it 150?
So
Is it 200 a day?
Councilmember,
Saturday?
if you take her numbers and basically divide it by 50, you'll have roughly what that hour is for that day. So when she had mentioned 2,000 at a low on one of those, that would mean an average of about 40 people that would actually be there during that hour. And the highs of 10,000, that would obviously just divide it by 50, and that'll give you an hour rate that you would
Right.
anticipate seeing there.
All right. I still don't know if Sunday and Saturdays is still a good day to keep our library open. What I'm seeing, I think I heard 43,509 people per year.
So through the mayor to Councilmember Orlando, Saturdays and Sundays are our busiest day across the board and in our branches, 100%. 65,315 people at the downtown branch enter our facilities on Saturdays. The downtown facility on Saturdays, we see 63,315 people. On Sunday at the downtown branch, we see 43,509 people coming through. Even the Bashaw Library, that's not open on Sunday, so that's not a good example. Let me find Sunset. Here's Sunset. Oh.
So do you have a question that she's still trying to answer, Councilmember Orlando?
I've actually got a kind of a call to question.
All right, Councilmember Stewart.
Yes, sir. Is there a way that a city manager can handle this? From, as a policy direction, I get that we set the vision and the mission for the city, but this is a $40,000 decision. There's 29 people in here. I think this is something that, and welcome to the team, by the way. I'm sorry, I should have said that first. Welcome. And so we're glad to have you, but I think this is something we should allow the CEO of the city to sort of manage through for us.
Well, I think this was brought to us by the CEO because she wanted this has been in times past, similar to pools, that this has been a decision that council has wanted to weigh in historically. So I think that's why she brought that to us, if I'm not mistaken. So city manager, would you?
Mayor, in light of the time constraint we have, let us go back, let us put together something a little clearer for council to make a decision on, and we will bring this back to you.
That would be helpful, because
Thank
we're
you. Sorry
trying to
about
put
that.
together
I
numbers
apologize.
that's non-existent. So, Councilmember McClymons.
I'll be quick. So I guess what you're presenting to me, based on what the data you presented, will save about 40,000 on option A.
Yes.
If we trim an hour that's not getting much usage.
Correct.
That to me seems reasonable. Option B sounds like we're trimming some time on the weekend, which is our busiest day of the year, and we're only picking up an extra $10,000 a year in savings. So I would lean towards A, and I'd feel comfortable based on the data you presented to push for A.
Council Vice Mayor.
So yeah, on this, I think that for the additional data, I think we need to break it out a little more. And then also historically, and the other thing is because we want to look at, as mentioned, with the COVID crisis, with economic issues, we had been seeing previously, when we had this presented to us a couple of years ago, we were seeing a downward trend of library usage and hours. We're doing some diversification in some of the usage after hours and so on. Maybe that's something to be revisited. And then also looking at that trend and trying to make a decision during a crisis. I don't know if we do want to cut those hours, like you said, because right now, we're still trying to get people out of that crisis, and also that, again, are now utilizing the library a little more. Maybe that trend is kicking up, and I don't know if necessarily right now would be a good decision to cut those hours. So I think more data should be gathered. Thank you.
So Council,
And Mayor,
I would also welcome just more information coming and us not making a decision on this tonight. So,
Mayor,
Councilmember Orlando.
and I appreciate that. It's a little more difficult, obviously, when you're down here trying to do the math. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So but I do want to ask one other question, though, or at least a request. You know, as the Vice Mayor indicated, services are changing. We're moving towards other areas as a library facility, not just from books, but what other services are lacking that maybe we could apply some of these savings to those? I'm talking about like early reading programs, adult literacy programs, maybe some computer classes for people looking for jobs. So I guess my other challenge to this is, yes, I like to see savings. I think we should transition to other areas, but at the same token, if we have large needs there, is there some other way to implement those large needs and expand those programs, taking this money and expanding those programs rather than just counting them as a savings?
So Council, let's treat that rhetorical, and our brand new chief librarian will get back to us, and we'll have a chance to revisit this conversation. So with your permission, let's move on, and then we'll get back. We'll have a chance to revisit this. So
I second that.
City Manager, anything else on this?
Mayor, Council, appreciate the opportunity to give you a quarterly update. As you can tell, our situation is different than we thought it might be several months ago. So anyway, we continue to monitor our expenditures and the revenues, and we will adjust accordingly with operations. Thank you.
My takeaway is that Chandler's economy has been impacted, but we're strong because of the diversification that us and previous councils and our economic development department has afforded us, and we're weathering well, still impacted, but we are getting through this better than expected. So kudos, city staff, for getting us here. And with this, I'm going to close our study session. We'll convene in 5 minutes at our regular city council meeting.
Mr. Blackbird sitting in the tree, why don't you come down and sing to me about all the people that you see as you travel around the world? Oh, Mr. Blackbird sitting in the tree, why don't you come down and sing to me about all the people that you see as you travel around the world? tree. Why don't you come down and sing to me about all the people that you see as you travel around the world? Oh, Mr. Blackbird sitting in the tree. Why don't you come down and sing to me about all the people that you see as you travel around the world? Oh, Mr. Blackbird sitting in the tree. Why don't you come down and sing to me about all the people that you see as you travel around the world?
All right, guys, we're starting. Good evening and welcome to the regular City Council meeting of August 27th, 2020. I'd like to call this meeting to order. City Clerk, take the roll, please.
Mayor Hartke,
Here.
Vice Mayor Lopez,
Here.
Councilmember Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember McClymans,
Here.
Councilmember Wong,
Here.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
Um,
didn't hear you.
Councilmember Orlando.
Here.
Great. Thank you, City Clerk. Our invocation tonight will be brought by Pastor Andy White of Faith Family Church and our Pledge of Allegiance by Councilmember Sam Huang. Pastor, welcome.
Good place here?
It's fine. There's a microphone at the dais there, so.
Amen. Lord, thank you so much for this amazing city and wonderful community of wonderful people. And I just thank you so much for a wonderful city government that has maintained peace and prosperity, and they fulfilled the role of government as it's supposed to be. So I just thank you for this wonderful city and government, and I just ask that tonight would be a great meeting, that the members would be encouraged and strengthened in the achievements of what they've done. And I thank you for the people of this wonderful city. And we just pray peace, prosperity, love, and joy would abound in all of what we do. We thank you for this night, for this evening, and we just pray it be fruitful and that issues will be resolved and we will continue into the peace that you've called us to live in. In Jesus' mighty name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Please join me to the allegiance for the Pledge for the allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, council member. So council, tonight we have 21 items on our agenda. I did have one response that related to item number 14 that I will read, that since we offer people the opportunity to call these in rather than be here. This is by a Sherry Farang at 860 West Comstock. She asked, can you demonstrably show me that this purchase, item 14, was previously scheduled to be made in the approximate amounts of $4.2 million, and show us that the $1.7 million shortfall in tax revenue is due to the COVID virus economic impact. I know that that's not quite the way that the dollars were given to us, and we have a lot more latitude, but I'm going to defer city manager to address this.
Mayor, thank you. Appreciate the question coming in from a constituent of yours. So definitely this item, as you all are aware, is something that we have asked for to get the organization more mobile. It was very strategic in the fact that we were getting ready to replace all of the desktop computers at the city, and it would make sense in light of everything that's occurred, not only that, but to set ourselves up as an organization to become more mobile. Therefore, we did ask the council if we could use the $1.7 million out of the CARES program. As everyone is aware, those dollars did come to the city as general fund dollars that can be spent on anything that the mayor and council give us direction to spend it on. And with that, if you have further questions about the actual item and what's being purchased, I will refer that over to Sandeep Dalaki, our CIO.
And I know that we talked about this and had opportunity on Monday. I was just addressing the public comment related to this one item on our consent agenda. So council, no further questions. A motion would be in order. Councilmember McClymons.
I move to approve consent agenda item for tonight's meeting, August 27th, 2020. Consent agenda items 1 through 21.
Is there a second? Second by Vice Mayor Lopez. Any additional comments related to our agenda tonight before we vote?
Mayor,
Councilmember Wong.
I would like to vote no on item 14, 15, and 16. I think we are overcharged, and that's it.
Okay, so that will be noted in the record. Any additional comments?
Mayor,
Councilmember Orlando.
thank you, sir. I have a conflict of interest in item 4 since I am hired for that organization.
All right, so conflict of interest on item number 4 noted as well. Seeing no additional comments, council, please vote. Councilmember Orlando?
Yes.
All right.
Motion carries unanimously, with the exception of item 4. Councilmember Orlando declared a conflict of interest, and items 14, 15, and 16, Councilmember Wong voted no.
All right, thank you, clerk. And are there any unscheduled public appearances? I know nobody has turned in a card. Seeing none. Next on our agenda tonight are council announcements. I have a few and we will go down the line. My first is related to first mile, last mile. Councilmember McClymons has brought this up in the past, but the new partnership between the city of Chandler, I think Councilmember Stewart, I'm sorry, and Lyft begins next Tuesday, September 1st. This first mile, last mile program will provide up to 50% off on rides to and from designated bus stops south of Pecos Road. This partnership helps the city expand public transit access to an area of the city with limited availability, while at the same time avoiding the high cost of adding multiple new bus routes. This partnership is a prime example of how our city continues to find innovative ways to provide necessary services for our residents while saving tax dollars. And for more information, you can visit our website. Secondly, I'd like to give an update on the job fair, which we participated in several months ago. In partnership with Arizona at Work, Best Companies AZ, Career Connectors, and Pipeline AZ, we held the first ever virtual hiring event this summer to connect job seekers with Chandler-based employers. Over 700 job seekers signed up for access to the hundreds of jobs posted from the 12+ Chandler-based employers. Nearly 600 seekers were interviewed, hired, or matched to a Chandler-based employer. I want to thank our economic development team and our partners for making this a standout success. It was good to be able to provide these jobs when others were losing jobs because of the pandemic. And lastly, I'd like to share some good news, some more good news that as a result of council decisions. We started our city an I Choose Chandler Business Retention and Hiring Program. The I Choose Chandler Business Retention and Hiring Program is experiencing tremendous success in the first week and a half since the launch. Council, as you recall, we started this on August 17th. And as a result of the $9.5 million that we sought to invest in our community, as of yesterday, 380 total applications were initiated, submitted, and are processed. A total of $1.223 million in program funding has been approved for disbursement. And my understanding, this is going out in batches rather than just kind of individually, so it goes out in a bigger bunch. And feedback on the program has been overwhelmingly positive. Businesses have expressed the ease of the application to be incredibly smooth and simple. So I say to those eligible businesses who have not submitted yet, please do so. Visit our website to apply. We have ample room to be able to help you and your business during these times. And the first round of applications will close September 7th, with the second round opening shortly after. So we hope that all of those who are able in Chandler who think this would be a benefit, please apply. We're working hard to help you and your business. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor, and appreciate those updates. It's really good to hear what's going on with the I Choose Chandler program. And for those of you that tuned into the meeting just now, at 4:30 we had a meeting regarding our budget, and I want to commend staff, and Dawn, especially your staff, with putting us in a place where we feel comfortable and we feel safe as it relates to our financial situation. That's a good place to be, and in light of the financial implications that are going on right now, as well as the COVID challenges that much of America is facing. Chandler's in a good place, and I feel really confident in where we are. So thank you for that. And don't forget, if you haven't taken the census yet, get on your phone, go to census.gov and get that census done. We're still chasing our neighbor to the east, and I'm already hearing about it. So help me out, help out the city and get that census taken. Thank you.
Councilmember McClimans.
I do have one question for you, Councilmember Stewart. So if they know that we have completed 72% of it, that means they must know the end number to calculate a percentage.
We're going to treat that as a rhetorical question, Mayor.
Oh, no, that's right.
Rhetoric rises.
Right? Am I right?
That's a good point. How do they know?
Vice Mayor.
I have no announcements today, Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Wong.
Just want to echo Councilmember Mark Stewart. Please get yourself counted and nothing else. Thank you.
Councilmember Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. As always, I want to shout out my support to our public safety folks, our police, our fire, all our hardworking employees that are out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keeping the lights on. Thank you to the community too for working together and just trying to keep Chandler in perspective and keep things where we are decent to each other. And I'm happy to see that. And I didn't get a chance to say to Rochelle Cusick, thank you for coming here and presenting about the library for the first time. And boy, we really put you through it, but thank you. Thank you for being here and welcome. Those are my comments. Thank you.
City Manager.
Mayor, I have nothing tonight. Thank you.
All right. Council, that concludes our meeting tonight.